Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from Rouse IAS. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we'll be taking up the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 16th November 2020. Now in front of your screen are the articles that will be taken up today, and the time stamping for the same has been provided on the description box below. So now let's begin. Before beginning with this discussion, let us try to attempt these statements as true and false, and at the end of this discussion you shall find answer for the same. Now this article appears on the page number 10 of the Hindu newspaper, and it has been titled as India-US Keen on Training Peace Missions. Now this peace mission here refers to the United Nations peacekeeping mission that is run by this global organization. And hence this article falls under the mandate of GS paper 2 subsection International Relations, wherein it talks about the important international institutions, agencies, fora, their structure and mandate. Now in this article it talks about how global powers such as India, China and US are trying to increase their contribution to this UN peacekeeping mission. Now China on one hand is trying to scale up its personnel towards the mission, while India and US on the other hand are trying to undertake training of these personnels, especially from the Southeast Asian countries. Now in this article, as we move forward, we'll first try to understand what are the key facts about this United Nations peacekeeping mission, especially from the perspective of prelims. Moving forward, we'll try to understand what is this peacekeeping training that this article is talking about. Further, we'll try to understand India's contribution to this mission, and at last, what are the recent reforms that are being talked about with regard to this mission. So now let's begin the discussion. Now, peacekeeping has been developed as a unique and a dynamic instrument by the United Nations organization as a way to help countries torn by conflict and to create a condition for lasting peace. In order to do so, they have created a troop known as peacekeepers, also referred to as blue berets or blue helmets, which is referred by the cap that these soldiers wear. Now this is an important term that you should keep in mind from the prelims perspective. Now these peacekeepers include soldiers, police officers and even civilian personnel. Now this organization was initially developed during the Cold War in 1948 to handle the conflict that the world and the global powers were going through. Now the purpose as earlier defined was to help countries to transition from conflict towards global peace. Now this organization derives its power from the UN Charter, and hence it is guided by three basic principles, that is the consent of the parties, impartiality and non-use of force except in case of self-defense and defense of the original mandate of the organization. Further, an important point from the prelims is that this peacekeeping force is not considered as an army of the United Nations, and these troopers are considered to remain members of their respective armed forces and are not considered part of UN army. This is something that you should keep in mind from the point of view of the prelims examination. Further, moving on to the financial aspect of the organization. Now, as per the UN mandate, all the members are legally obligated to pay respective share towards these peacekeeping operations. As a result of which, these peacekeeping operations are collective responsibility of all the UN 193 member states. Further, moving on to the multidimensional aspect of the UN peacekeeping operations. Now, one key point to be remembered here is while the name of the organization is peacekeeping, its mandate is much larger, varied and multidimensional. Now, first important role is of course maintaining peace and security across the world. Other important factors that it facilitates involves facilitating political process across countries, protecting civilian, assisting in the process of disarmament, demobilization and reintegration. Further, it involves the process of organization of regular elections, promoting human rights across the world, and at last assisting in restoring rule of law wherever it is disrupted. Thus, clearly, the wide operations of the organization mandate massive support in terms of financial and human resources by all of the 193 UN members. Now, moving towards the next important aspect, that is the training of the peacekeeping mission by India and US with respect to Southeast Asian nations. Now, peacekeeping training, as the name suggests, aims at equipping the UN peacekeepers, that are UN military, police, and civil personnels, to enhance their skills, knowledge, and attitudes that enable them to overcome the challenges that these peacekeeping operations throw at them. Now, this also involves performing specialist functions so as to fulfill the core values and mandates of the United Nations. Thus, like any other training, the peacekeeping training only helps to enhance the value of the human resources that are serving the peacekeeping operations. Further, this peacekeeping training gets its validity from the General Assembly resolution that recognizes the responsibility of all member states to train the uniformed personnel of the peacekeeping operations. Now, in this regard, there was a UN peacekeeping course for African partners that was established in 2016 as a joint annual initiative by India and US. Now, on the similar lines, in 2020, both the countries have decided to train military personnel for Southeast Asian countries on the similar lines as was earlier done for African nations. Now, let us try to trace the relation between India and UN peacekeeping. Now, India, up till couple of years back, was considered as the largest contributor of the uniformed personnel or peacekeepers to this mission. However, recently India has reduced to becoming the fifth largest contributor of the uniformed personnel to this mission. India by far has participated in 51 out of 71 total missions, contributing as much as 2 lakh personnel, which is huge. Further, in comparison to the other important nations, India presently contributes approximately 5,500 troopers, while China contributes 2,500, almost half of India, while US contributes none. And this reflects India's soft power, since with respect to the financing, India does not contribute as much if compared vis-a-vis China and US that contribute 15% and 27% respectively, while India barely contributes 0.1%. Hence, India's contribution is mainly in terms of human resource, that is soft power, which has been India's strength always, while China and US have mostly contributed in terms of hard power, that is hard power cash. Further, India has also undertaken various key resolutions for reforming the Council, such as it co-sponsored a Security Council resolution to enhance women's participation in these peacekeeping missions. And not just co-sponsored the resolution, India also made history in 2007 when it deployed its first all-women police unit to a UN mission in Liberia. Further, in last 72 years of this mission's existence, India contribute to the highest death rate in terms of any other troop contributing country. And thus it is clear that India's contribution to peacekeeping mission has been huge, and with respect to any issues that arise into this mission, India has a larger say. Thus, let us try to understand what are the concerns with respect to UN peacekeeping and what are the resolutions that we must undertake globally to ensure peacekeeping mission continues to fulfill its mandate. Now let us try to look into certain concerns that have been rising on and off against the UN peacekeeping operations. Further, let us try to look into certain reform that can be suggested in this regard. Now the first important concern is with respect to the difference of opinion that is seen between the countries of the global north and global south. Now, global north can be understood in terms of developed countries such as UK and US, while the south involves developing countries such as India, Brazil, South Africa, etc. Now, the first important conflict is with respect to resources. Now, while the northern countries are hesitating to engage more troops within the UN due to general lack of human resources, the southern states are hesitating to enhance the financial contributions because this would result in diversion of resources that could have better spent on fighting causes such as poverty. Further, with respect to mandate, the northern countries have been demanding expansion of the mandate of the UN peacekeeping force, while the southern countries fear loss of sovereignty in case expansion of the mandate occurs. And hence we see fundamental conflict with respect to the basic demands between global north and global south. Now moving on to the next concern, that is the rising cases of sexual abuse by peacekeepers. Now what happens when people who are mandated to restore peace only themselves indulge in heinous criminal activities such as molestation and rape? Now these cases have been rising in the recent years, because of which UN Security Council had adopted a resolution 2272 to hold the peacekeepers accountable for sexual abuse. Now this is something that needs to be strictly undertaken so as to ensure such events do not occur in near future. Further, another concern that is raised is that these operations by the UN peacekeeping force as directed by the Security Council is mostly limited to geopolitical significant region, while rest of the world countries are ignored. Further, it is suggested that there are a lot of delays with respect to the commencement of the operation of the UN peacekeeping force, and hence it is suggested that there must be a decision made within 30 days to a maximum of 90 days so as to avoid tragedies because of mere delay. In this regard, an important suggestion is to set up a rapid reaction force so as to prevent such delays in future. Another important concern raised is involvement of experts from various fields. Now, involvement of expert will bring in diversity of thought and processes and will further strengthen the function of the peacekeeping force. Furthermore, suggestions have been made to set up a sound exit policy for these UN peacekeepers. Now, what generally happens is that when these peacekeepers enter that country, they establish a peace. But mostly this peace is temporary and is not being able to make permanent. As a result of which these peacekeepers are not able to actually establish a long-term peace in the region. And hence they sort of establish a permanent base, and that is something that is not desirable as per the mandate of the UN peacekeeping. And this is something that needs to be given thought to. Now the last reform is to work towards improving the safety of these peacekeepers, while at the other hand we try to keep them accountable for their action so as to prevent such events in future. So with this we come to the end of the concern and reform. Hence, after this detailed analysis, we can clearly see the huge benefits and the critical role that UN peacekeeping operations have been undertaking across the world. And in this regard, this step by India and US will go a long way in contributing to the mandate of this mission. Now moving on to the next article. Now this article appears on the page number 1 of the Hindu newspaper, and it has been titled as Worst Air Quality on Deepavali in 4 years. Now as per the Central Pollution Control Board, the air in Delhi and the NCR region has turned to severe category. And this is because of the collection of a blanket of smog and pollutants over this region. Now as a result of which the pollution has reached to a dreaded 435 on the air quality index. Now reason for this worst air quality as discussed in various previous analysis and news report is the stubble burning in the NCR region, especially Haryana and Punjab states wherein stubble burning has been prevalent, alongside of which there has been other causes such as low wind speed. However, in the recent times with the onsetting of western disturbances, these factors have taken a 360-degree turn, wherein the wind speed is back in action approximately 25 km per hour. Further, it has also been associated with light rain in the region, as a result of which we are seeing dispersal of pollutants over the NCR region. Now, since this topic talks about the environment and pollutant, especially with respect to the NCR region and associated climatic phenomena such as western disturbance, it falls under the mandate of Indian and World Geography as a part of the prelims syllabus. Further, with respect to the main syllabus, it falls under the mandate of GS Paper 1, subsection Geography of the World, wherein it talks about various geophysical phenomena such as cyclone. Now let us start this discussion by dwelling upon what is western disturbance and how does it impact India. Now western disturbances are weather system that drape the northern plains of India and the Himalayan region with snow and light rainfall. Now this happens mostly during the non-monsoonal period, and hence these are non-monsoonal precipitation pattern that are driven by the westerlies towards the Indian subcontinent. Now western disturbance is an extratropical storm that originates near the low pressure region of the Mediterranean Sea, the Atlantic Ocean and the parts of Europe. Now let us first try to understand what caused these storms to originate in the first place. Now as we all know, at the higher latitudes around the Ukraine region, there is a cold atmosphere which gives rise to what is known as cold air mass. Now at the lower levels, that is the subtropical latitude around the region of Mediterranean, what we see is a warmer air mass. Now due to shifting of the belts, these two air masses come in contact, giving rise to what is known as cyclogenesis because of the frontal formation around the Mediterranean region. And hence we see development of extratropical storm in this region. Further, this storm is taken towards the direction of Indian subcontinent by the westerly jet streams that are moving at the speed of 43 km per hour at the upper region of the troposphere. And hence these western disturbances get embedded in the mid-latitude subtropical western jet streams, and they reach India, especially in the northwestern direction, wherein it gives snowfall in the upper higher latitude of the Himalaya and give rain in the plains of the northern India, that is Haryana, Punjab, UP, Rajasthan, Delhi, etc. And the rain that Delhi received yesterday was part of this phenomena. Now, because of this active western disturbance on the Diwali weekend, the region of the northern India, especially this region, received rainfall with respect to 0.1 to 15 mm, whereas the highest region received as much as 120 mm of rainfall. Now, this rainfall over the Delhi region has led to light showers that have washed away the pollutants in the air that were covering or blanketing the Delhi region. Further, it has also enhanced the wind speed by 25 km per hour. resulting in dispersal of pollutants and improving the overall air quality in the Delhi and NCR region. Now let us try to look into what all other impacts that western disturbance have over Indian climate. Now the western disturbances result in cloudy sky, higher night temperature and unusual rain that we had already discussed with respect to heavy to moderate rainfall in low-lying areas of the northern Indian plains and heavy snowfall in the mountain region. Now it is this snowfall that gives rise to perennial source of water in the North Indian rivers, and hence this western disturbance is a good source of water for the northwestern India. Further, this has also resulted in winter and pre-monsoonal rainfall across northwest India. This results in beneficial Rabi crops, especially the wheat, which is one of the most important crops that helps to meet India's nutritional security. On an average, 4 to 5 of the western disturbances are formed during the winter season. Further, not all is hunky-dory with respect to western disturbances. There are certain ill effects that we must know. Now, one of the important ill effect is the crop damage that excessive rainfall and hailstorms can cause. This also results in landslides and avalanches in the higher latitudes of the Himalaya. Further, they may also result in occasional cold wave conditions and dense fog along the Indo-Gangetic plains. And hence, when the western disturbances move across northwest India before the onset of the monsoon, a temporary advancement of monsoon appears over the region, which has both positive and negative impact as discussed. With this, we come to the end of this discussion. Let's move on to the next article. Now this article appears on the page number 1 of the Hindu newspaper, and it has been titled as the Mega Trade Bloc RCEP takes off. Now RCEP stands for Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Now this is an agreement, a mega trade bloc that has been signed between 15 countries, and this has finally come into existence after a lot of discussions and deliberations. And now, since this topic talks about free trade agreement, it falls under the mandate of GS paper 3 subsection economic development. Further, since this agreement is a global agreement, it also falls under the mandate of GS paper 2 subsection international relations. Thus, clearly this topic can be part of both paper 2 and paper 3 depending upon how question has been framed. Now finally this agreement has come into force. Now as we move forward with this topic, we will discuss the following dimensions. Firstly, we will discuss about the free trade agreement. Second, we will discuss about the benefits that it could result for India if it decides upon joining this agreement, the challenges that India's membership to this agreement may bring, and at last we will discuss the way forward for India. So now let's begin with the discussion. Now Regional Cooperation Economic Partnership, as is reflected on the screen, is a mega trade bloc comprising 15 countries in total. Now it includes 10 ASEAN countries and 5 nations with which ASEAN countries have free trade agreements. Now these 5 nations include Australia, China, Japan, South Korea and New Zealand. India too was supposed to be a part of this agreement. However, recently last year, India pulled out of this agreement. Now finally RCEP has come into being, and it takes into account trade in goods, services, investments, economic and technical cooperation, intellectual property rights, competition, dispute settlement, etc. And hence RCEP not only has a lot of countries but also has a wide mandate. Now India, although last year had categorically stated that it will not be joining the agreement, as it does not fully reflect the basic spirit and the agreed guiding principles of the RCEP. But then India has also categorically stated that it is ready to join RCEP in near future, if all its concerns are addressed by the group. Now let us see what all benefits can India reap if it decides to later join RCEP. Now it is said that RCEP will allow India to effectively utilize its existing free trade agreements. Now India presently has free trade agreement with 12 out of the 15 RCEP countries. Hence, joining RCEP will further expand this mandate of the existing free trade agreement, that will complement the existing free trade agreement and help India to further reap these benefits. Now, the second important benefit is that it will help in regional integrations. Now, 21st century is set to be the Asian century. Now, bringing together all the big countries of the Asian region will help enable in regional integration. This will further strengthen India's Act East and Look East policy. Further, this is quite important for India because India is not a party of two other important regional blocs, that is APAC and Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now, the third important benefit is that it will help India harness the competitive advantage that it enjoys in the field of services, especially with respect to ICT, education and healthcare sector. Further, it is suggested that this will help India attract investment from this region. Now, India is one of the most promising emerging economies of the 21st century, and hence joining such agreements will bring in lot of investment which will further economic growth of the country. And lastly, joining RCEP will help India integrate into the global value chain. That will help boost India's manufacturing in terms of Make in India and boost exports that shall help bring in lot of forex, resulting in greater economic development. Thus, clearly joining RCEP holds lot of benefit for India. But then there are also a lot of challenges because of which India has not chosen to join the RCEP yet. Now let's have a look at these challenges. Now, one of the most important challenge and concern with respect to India's membership of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership is that there is a fear that it will further worsen India's trade deficit. Now, India presently has $104 billion trade deficit, out of which 65% is with respect to the RCEP members. Now, thus it is said, the agreement that aims to eliminate almost 90% of the tariff on imported goods over next 15 years will further worsen this trade deficit. Hence, India has been apprehensive that this RCEP agreement will lead to increased trade deficit, especially with respect to China, with which India has the maximum trade deficit. Now, the second important concern is with respect to the adverse impact of previous FTAs. Now, in India's experience, its previous free trade agreements with countries like Japan and South Korea have led to substantial increase in imports of goods into the domestic market. Now, this has hurt the policy of Make in India, resulting in weakening of domestic manufacturing. Moving on to the next challenge, which is with respect to the base year. Now, the RCEP countries have been demanding that the base year should be 2013, while India has been demanding that the base year should be made to be 2019. Now, here it should be noted that India had increased its import duty on several products between 2014 and 2019. And hence adoption of 2019 as the base year would have led to lower reduction in the custom duties and offered protection to the Indian domestic industry. And this was a cause of concern for India and one of the reasons why India did not choose to sign RCEP. Another important concern was the ratchet clause. Now, what does ratchet clause mean? Now, ratchet means a screw which only turns in one direction, either up or down, and it cannot be turned both the ways at the same time. Now, this concept, when applied to RCEP, will disallow the member countries to increase the import duty once it have been reduced. Now what does this mean? Now in the context of Indian government which wanted the RCEP members to adopt safeguard mechanism which should enable the countries to increase the tariff on certain products when there is a sudden surge in import. However, the RCEP countries wanted that once tariff on the good is raised, it should not be allowed to reduce. Now, this came in direct conflict with India's interest, and hence India chose not to join RCEP. Now, another important concern was with respect to adoption of liberalized rule of origin. Now again, this would have affected India's interest as it would have led to China indirectly sending its good to India via other RCEP member states, further hurting India's interest and raising India's trade deficit. Now next important challenge is with respect to state dispute settlement mechanism. Now it is said that under multilateral trade and investment agreements such as RCEP, a third-party forum is normally provided for to resolve such disputes that arise out of these mechanisms. Now this means that the relevant law and judiciary in India will no longer be able to intervene in such disputes, and hence India will lose all sort of control over such dispute settlement, which is against the India's larger interest, hence became another reason why India did not choose to join RCEP. Now the last important concern was with respect to data localization. Now in the e-commerce chapter of RCEP, the provision against the data localization went against India's interest, as India has been vouching for data localization. Since data is the new oil, India wishes to tap into its massive data structure, and hence this provision went against its overall interest. So these were the challenges that have caused India to stay out of the RCEP. Now let us try to see what all steps India can take moving forward with respect to its overall economic interest and its membership of the RCEP. Now it is suggested that India already, as previously discussed, has FTAs with almost 12 countries that are already part of RCEP. Now out of which the three pending countries, one is China, with which we never want to have an RCEP, so remaining only two countries are pending. Thus India in short run can always afford to remain out of it, because it is only these two countries that will add on to India if it decides to join RCEP. Secondly, the Surjit Bhalla committee highlighted that FTAs signed by India have been a mixed bag so far. So it cannot be conclusively said that even joining RCEP will yield positive results for India in terms of economic benefits. Thirdly, it is suggested that since India has not been able to reap full benefits of the FTA by far, hence before moving ahead with RCEP, it must try to realize the presently existing FTA, whose utilization by far is barely 25%. Furthermore, it is suggested that it is high time India realizes that the 60% contribution of consumption expenditure to the GDP is not sustainable in long term, and especially with respect to its status as an emerging economy. Since majority of the empirical evidence suggests that it is the exports that largely contribute to the economic growth, as is evident from the China's growth driven by massive exports. And hence India must try in this era of globalization to work on enhancing its export competitiveness by addressing various infrastructure challenges, bottlenecks, strengthening skill base, building manufacturing capabilities, improving logistic supply chain, and focusing on R&D. And hence it can be suggested that although India can shy away from RCEP in short run, but in long run, India as a country will have to strengthen itself internally to be able to better utilize the existing FTAs and the future FTAs such as RCEP. And now, with respect to RCEP, while India tries to strengthen itself within, it must also try to negotiate a better deal for itself and sooner or later join RCEP to ensure the 21st century actually turns up to becoming the Asian century, with India becoming its rising power. So, with this, we come to the end of this discussion. Now, moving on to the next article. Now, this article appears on the page number 9 of the Hindu newspaper, and it has been titled as Arunachal Records Best Sex Ratio, Manipur the Worst. Now, this article talks about the civil registration system that has released its data with respect to the sex ratio in the country. Now, since sex ratio is a social justice question, hence it falls under the mandate of GS Paper 2, wherein it talks about the issues related to the vulnerable sections of the population. Further, this is also important from the point of view of the prelim examination, since it takes into account the various dimensions of the social development in the country. Now, let us look into the facts given in this data and also try to understand about the civil registration system that this article talks about. Now, since this article presents data for sex ratio at birth, let us first try to understand what does this mean. Now, in simple terms, sex ratio at birth refers to the number of females that have been born per 1,000 male. Now, as per the data provided in this article, Arunachal Pradesh records highest number of females born per 1,000 males in India. That is 1,084 females have been born per 1,000 male. That is, in Arunachal Pradesh, females are born more often than males are born. However, another surprising factor is that in northeastern states that are mostly tribal, it is another state, that is Manipur, that records the least number of females that have been born per 1,000 male. Now, this contrast is very interesting and unique. Now, in Manipur, there are only 757 females per 1,000 males. Now, this graph effectively represents this data. Clearly, Manipur is at the last with 757 females per 1,000 male, and Arunachal Pradesh tops the chart with 1,084 female per 1,000 males. Now, another point that must be kept in mind with respect to prelims is that Arunachal Pradesh is the only state wherein the number of females surpass the number of males. Now, moving on to the next part. The requirement for a complete and up-to-date vital statistics system to yield reliable data with respect to various social economic factors across the country hardly needs any more emphasis. Now, in this regard, the Government of India has two main systems. One is the civil registration system, another is the population census, that is the main source of data with respect to vital events in India. Now, while population census is the main source of information on population and its characteristics, however, being a decadal exercise, that is once in 10-year exercise, it does not provide effectively a measure of change on yearly basis. The measure of fertility and mortality derived from the census are mostly based on the midpoint of the decade and does not actually reflect the yearly change in the population. And hence it is important for a system such as the civil registration system, that is effectively a unified process of continuous, permanent, compulsory, universal recording of vital events and characteristics thereof as per the legal requirement of the country. Now, what is this legal requirement? Now, the civil registration system derives its authenticity from Registration of Birth and Death 1969 Act. Thus, in India, the registration of birth and death is carried out under the provision of this Act. Now, the registration is done by the registrar of the local area, that is appointed by the concerned state and UT. And thus this Act provides the registration of birth and death and publication of this data and its report annually based on the civil registration data. Further, an important point to be noted here that this is the only source for providing vital stats at the district level. Now, this is very important from the prelims perspective. Further, it is suggested that this civil registration of data is of paramount importance, especially after the 73rd and the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act that established the third layer of government in India. Now, these amendments, as it provided for data at local level for facilitating micro level planning, monitoring and evaluation of schemes. And hence it can be said that the civil registration system in turn fills the gap of the decadal population census by providing annual data about critical statistical parameters such as birth and death in the country. Further, this data is also available at the national level with respect to 4 parameters, that is sex ratio, mortality, morbidity rates and cause of death, so as to facilitate regular studying on an annual basis. Now, both these topics are important from the prelims perspective, especially with respect to difference between these two exercises and the data they cater to. Now, moving on to the next article. Now, this article appears on the page number 10 and has been titled as Formal Chief Election Commission Calls for a Ban on Opinion Polls. Now, since opinion polls are in context with the elections in India, hence it falls under the mandate of GS paper 2 subsection polity. Now in this article, S.Y. Qureshi, who is the former Chief Election Commissioner of India, has flagged the problem of criminalization. Now since criminalization was covered extensively in the DNS dated 28 Jan 2020, we will not be repeating the issue of criminalization of politics. Rather, we will talk about the opinion polls. Now, opinion poll simply refer to a poll or survey in terms of human research survey of public opinion from a particular sample. Now, opinion polls are usually designed to represent the opinion of a population by conducting a series of questions and then extrapolating the answers received. Now, the person who conducts these opinion polls are referred to as pollster. Further, these opinion and exit poll by themselves are like research and are useful to gain insights into what people think with respect to policies, programs and product of the current government. However, the Election Commission has been opposing these polls because they strongly suspect their integrity. Now let us see what all issues do Election Commission have with these opinion polls. Now as per Election Commission, these polls are not scientific in nature as they are based on the opinion of a very few fraction of voters. Thus the sample size involved is really small and thus is not representative of the general population opinion. Further, it is suggested that these voters can get influenced by these polls and thus it is possible for media or politicians to manipulate the public opinion using these polls. Hence, they also can be used in an unethical fashion to derive political agenda. Further, it suggests that the survey represents opinion of a group of people and does not really count the group that actually votes. Thus, the people of whom we are taking an opinion might not actually be voting and hence their opinion do not really count in a democratic setup. Now, let us try to see what all suggestions have government bodies made with respect to opinion polls in India. Now, the Law Commission in its 2015 report has recommended a ban on opinion poll. Further, the Election Commission of India too has advocated suitable amendments in the section 126 of the RPA Act of 1951 so as to regulate opinion polls. Now, while Law Commission has called for a ban, Election Commission has called for regulation of these polls. Now let us try to give certain suggestions from our end. Now here we would suggest that even if the opinion polls are conducted, it is important to reveal the name of the sponsor of the survey. Suppose if one political party or politically affiliated group is sponsoring the opinion poll, then their result must not be taken up as seriously. Further, the name of the person and organization which conduct the poll also must be revealed and broadcasted publicly. Now, the details of the sample size and of the population from which this sample has been taken must also be revealed publicly. The people who participated and who were contacted for participation in the survey must be revealed. The margin of error and the sample deviation data too must be put in public domain. The report with respect to the data must be broadcasted within 24 hours, alongside also including the time, date of interviews, the people who were requested for the interview, the people who refused for the interview, the method used, the weightage given, the standard deviation and other similar data that reflect the depth of the sample that has been taken. And thus in this regard, the opinion polls can be regulated effectively as suggested by the Election Commission. So with this we come to the end of this discussion.